My name is Melanie Carter, and I didn't realize how practiced I'd become at pretending until the afternoon. My aunt slid a mug of coffee toward me, and the world tilted. I was still holding the wedding gift I'd spent weeks choosing crystal decanters, etched with my brother's initials, still letting myself imagine how it would feel to be included for once. The invitation had looked like a mended seam June 24th black tie, a garden strung with fairy lights. I had rehearsed a dozen simple sentences in my head, the kind that belong to people who are loved. I'm so happy for you, Ethan. Thank you for inviting me. The words had a newness that felt almost holy on my tongue. And then an open album on my aunt's coffee table stole the floor out from under me. There was my family, my brother in a navy tux, his bride shimmering in lace, my parents beaming beneath those very lights. Not tomorrow, not a rehearsal, already done. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. I stood there with the gift pressed to my ribs the way you brace a wound. My aunt's mouth moved apologies trembling through the room, but they sounded far away like words traveling underwater. I remember thinking the body is a strange place to live. It keeps breathing even when the center hollows out. Somewhere a clock ticked. Somewhere a neighbor's dog barked. Inside me, something very old and very tired sat down. That evening, I drove home in a silence too heavy for music. The dress I'd chosen hung from the closet door, waiting like a patient friend, soft navy with stitched stars along the sleeve that caught the light when I turned. I had pictured stepping from a rideshare, smoothing that sleeve with a smile that would say I belonged. But the invitation on my fridge, the gold filigree that had glittered like forgiveness, was now a joke with a punchline only I hadn't known. I took it down carefully, as if paper could bruise, folded it once, and slid it into a drawer. For years I had taught myself not to take up space, to be useful enough that being unseen would hurt a little less. That night I stared at my reflection and realized invisibility wasn't a fate that befalls you. It's a role you practice until you forget. It's a costume you can put down. I wasn't always the quiet one. That's the story people tell about me to make their own choices feel tidy. In our split-level house on Wren Court, I was the middle child. Yes, the space between my brother's golden boy glow and my sister's well-guarded softness. But what no one remembers is that I learned to read by streetlight when the power bill was overdue. That I stitched my own Halloween costume from my mother's old skirt because she was too tired to thread a needle. That on the night our father announced he was leaving, I poured cereal into 3 bowls and slid them across the counter like a waitress. When my mother cried into the dishwater, I stood on a chair and washed the knives, careful not to bleed. I was 12. By 16, I had a part-time job. By 19, I had moved out, and by 25, I could afford to buy my own groceries without running the math in my head. Somewhere along the way, I acquired a reputation for being fine. Fine doesn't ask, fine doesn't need. Fine is an armor you forget is heavy. What I remember most about that house are the edges of moments setting forks at a table. I rarely sat long enough to be asked about my day. Christmas mornings, where my sweater was a shade off from everyone else's like a printing error. Birthdays postponed until the week after, when schedules were better, when moods had improved, when I had already taught myself not to mind. "You're so easy, Mel," my mother used to say, pleased with how little I required. Easy women become invisible women. Invisible women become convenient myths. And myths are very easy to leave off a guest list. In the weeks after the invitation arrived, I let myself be naive. I imagined my brother searching the RSVP list and thinking of me. I imagined my mother dialing my number to say, "We want you there." I imagined the long, ordinary mercy of being included. When you're hungry for years, a crumb looks like a feast. I spent too much on a gift because generosity is the only language I learned fluently. I booked a hair appointment. I practiced smiling in the mirror without apology. The future I built in my head was small and bright, and possible a single photograph of me at their table, not as a ghost, but as a sister. I don't remember the drive to my parents' house the next morning, only the way the doormat rasped under my shoes and how quickly the room cooled when I walked in. Wedding photos lay in small, glossy piles on the coffee table like confetti after a parade. My brother didn't stand to greet me. My mother folded her arms. I asked the question because even when we know we ask, and when the answer came plain, unbeautiful, unadorned with excuses, my body did something astonishing it did not beg. There are moments you can measure your life against like a ruler. Mine will be the second I did not plead to be loved by people who had just declared the terms of their love. Driving back to my apartment, I counted the small ways we teach ourselves to vanish, the way we apologize before we speak, the way we soften our questions with a laugh, the way we hand people our explanations like flowers we hope they'll keep alive. The world doesn't tell women like me to disappear. It applauds how gracefully we do it. At a red light, the sun slid down behind a row of bare maples. For a breath-long moment, the windshield turned to vivid copper. I thought light always finds a way through. It is its nature. I slept little that night. I watered a plant that didn't need it. I washed 2 dishes. I stood in the doorway and looked at the dress one last time. Grief makes a cartographer of you. You learn the shape of empty rooms. In that small wakefulness, I opened my laptop, not to scroll myself numb, but to lay things down where they could not wriggle free: what I earn, what I own, what I give away. No one in my family had asked how I pay my rent. They preferred a story where I barely manage, where my quiet is proof of inadequacy. But I have spent a decade building quiet things that last, a business that began at a thrifted desk. Investments made one careful month at a time, properties whose roofs I replaced without attaching my name to the deed because it felt less shameful to help anonymously. Shame is the leash they hand you and call it love. That night, I set it on the floor. Morning arrived with that indecent brightness only heartbreak can sharpen. I made coffee and did not check my phone. When it finally buzzed, the screen lit with my aunt's name. Her voice was a gentler weather. She told me I could come by, that she'd make pancakes, that she would sit with me and say nothing if that's what I needed. Love sounds like that, an offer without a ledger. I went, and she did make pancakes, thin, crisp at the edges, the way she knows I like. We ate in companionable silence. She touched my wrist and said, "You're not crazy," and I believed her. It should not feel radical to be believed. Later, alone again, I thought about revenge and how loudly that word clangs inside a woman who has been erased. I won't lie, a dark part of me wanted spectacle, wanted something that would make them feel even a fraction of what had been rendered into me like a brand. But louder than that, hunger was a different one, the one that had whispered to me for years from under the floorboards, "Leave their table. Build your own. Invite only those who remember to ask how your day was." I have learned that sometimes the most devastating vengeance is not fire, but absence. A door closing without fanfare is still a thunderclap if you didn't think it could. People like to say time heals, but time only amplifies the things you feed it. So I began feeding it something besides the gnawing belief that I was hard to love. I fed it a new routine, walking at dawn when the streets felt unclaimed, letting air scour the ache. Emails to clients in cities I had never visited, each reply a proof that my work did not vanish when no one at home said my name. Saturday mornings volunteering at the literacy center, where a 12-year-old girl with bitten nails read her first chapter book without stumbling and grinned at me like we shared a secret. We did. The secret is that when you're told your voice doesn't count, you find somewhere it does, and you plant it there like a flag. I don't know when the resolve arrived, only that it did, quiet, decisive, like a key turning. I realized I had been writing my family as the main characters in a story that did not require them. The plot had always been mine: a woman who learned to take up the space grief vacated. A woman who understood that betrayal can be both a wound and a lamp. A woman who would stop building altars to people who starved her. That night I opened a new document and began to write, not a letter to them, not an explanation I would be tempted to send and regret, but a record for myself where the cuts began, where I stopped calling them paper thin, where I finally let myself call them what they were. I wrote in the first person because I had spent too long as a supporting character. I wrote the way I wish someone had spoken to me at 16 when my birthday slipped quietly into the next day. I wrote until the room dimmed and the words steadied my hands, and somewhere between one paragraph and the next, a sentence arrived that felt like a door opening onto a new road. I am done asking to be invited into rooms that make a sport of forgetting me. I don't know what I will do yet with all the knowledge I've tried not to own about deeds and signatures and the precariousness of the cottage my parents call theirs. About the ways I could pull the levers I built with my bare hands and let the consequences find their mark. Maybe that is what karma is, not a cosmic ledger, but the inevitable geometry of cause and effect. Maybe my work is only to stop catching the knives they throw and let them land where they must. For now, I am practicing a different kind of power: the refusal to shrink, the audacity of ordinary joy, the art of not explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I am learning that there are families made from blood and families made from kindness, and the latter are the only ones that keep you warm. I am learning to choose the table where I am fed. Tomorrow I will return the dress. I will keep the stitched stars. I will make soup from scratch and eat it on my balcony with my legs tucked under me like a girl. I will text my aunt a photo of the sky at 6:14 p.m. when it goes a nearly indecent pink. I will file certain papers in certain folders and understand what it means to be careful without being cruel. I will sleep with the window open and let the city's small noise remind me I am not alone. I will wake and know that the story is moving forward, not around in circles. And when I pass a mirror, I will not flinch at the woman looking back. I will nod to her like a pact. I will say without moving my lips, "You were always here. You were always enough. You are done being easy." The morning after I discovered the truth, I woke to sunlight pooling on the floorboards like nothing had changed. My phone buzzed with notifications, work emails, marketing updates, a message from a client about ad copy, but my family's silence was louder than all of them combined. No apology, no explanation, just a confirmation that invisibility had been intentional. The air inside my apartment felt stale, heavy with unspoken words, so I pulled on a sweater and left without a plan, wandering through streets where no one knew my name. There's a strange mercy in anonymity. It asks nothing of you but presence. At a small cafe tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore, I ordered coffee and watched people live. A mother corrected her child's math homework. A young couple argued softly about vacation plans. Two men in suits tapped at laptops like surgeons repairing arteries. I thought all these ordinary lives moving forward without me. I'd spent so many years begging for crumbs from people who couldn't be bothered to notice when there were entire worlds outside where being seen wasn't a negotiation. Still, I couldn't pretend their betrayal hadn't lodged itself under my skin like glass. I'd been excluded from birthdays, overlooked at holidays, reduced to a shadow at Thanksgiving tables. But the wedding, this was different. This was surgical. They had orchestrated an invitation with a false date, wrapped it in gold foil, sealed it with the illusion of belonging, then sat laughing beneath fairy lights while I ironed a dress for a ceremony that had already happened. That kind of cruelty doesn't fade with coffee and morning walks. It calcifies. By afternoon, I sat in Aunt Ruth's living room again. She pressed my hand and told me she wished she'd fought harder. She said, "You have always been stronger than you think, Melanie." I wanted to believe her, but strength had always felt like another word for silence. I had survived neglect, yes, but survival isn't the same as being valued. When I left her house, I drove not home but to the lake cottage, my parents' pride, the place of family barbecues and summers sticky with melted popsicles, the place I once thought of as home. The cottage sat quiet in the fading light pine trees, whispering against the water. I parked across the road and stared at the windows glowing with warm lamplight. I could almost hear their laughter drifting through the air. I imagined Ethan flipping through photographs, my mother pouring more wine, my father nodding at a story he half listened to. In those windows, I was erased so completely that it seemed I'd never existed. The longer I sat, the more I realized I wasn't powerless. They had taught themselves a story where I was helpless, forgettable, unworthy of space. But they didn't know the truth that while they dismissed me, I had been quietly building a life of my own. The cottage they adored so much, it wasn't truly theirs. Years ago, when foreclosure threatened, I had purchased my mother's share through an LLC thinking I was saving them. They never asked how taxes vanished from the ledger or why repairs seemed miraculously affordable. They assumed life had spared them. They never imagined their invisible daughter was the hand holding them afloat. That knowledge burned like a coal in my chest. For years I had given without credit, hoping generosity might earn me love. But standing in the shadows of that cottage, I understood love cannot be bought with silence. The following days blurred into lists and decisions. I called Susan, my attorney, and told her everything. She listened calmly, tapping her pen against a legal pad. "You've been their safety net for years without acknowledgement. You don't owe them anything," she said. I exhaled, realizing how much I'd needed someone to confirm it. We began assembling documents, deeds, payments, records of transfers. Each page was a ledger of how much I had carried without recognition. I wasn't interested in revenge, not exactly. What I wanted was clarity. What I wanted was to stop living as a ghost in my own story. Then came the phone call from my mother. "Melanie, what is this nonsense?" she demanded, her voice shrill with panic. "Susan says you're filing paperwork shutting down accounts. We are your family." The word family sliced through me. Family is supposed to be love, loyalty, care. But what I had endured wasn't family, it was a performance where I was the backstage crew expected to keep the lights on but never step into them. "No," I said quietly, "not anymore." And I hung up. My hand shook, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. When the eviction notice was finally delivered, my father opened the door. His shoulders sagged with years I hadn't noticed before. "Melanie," he said softly, "please won't you come in?" But I didn't. I stood firm as Michael, the second attorney, handed him the envelope. My father's voice cracked. "This is our home." "It was," I said, my tone even almost gentle. "Now it's mine." My mother appeared. Then her face pale, her mouth pinched. "You're kicking us out after everything we've done for you." I met her eyes and said the words I'd swallowed for decades. "After everything I did for you with no thanks, no acknowledgement. Yes, I am." Her lips trembled, but I didn't falter. "You have Ethan. Stay with him. You made it clear I wasn't part of this family. Now I'm making it clear I don't belong to yours either." I turned away before the cracks in my resolve could show. Sometimes strength is just the ability to walk out the door without turning back. That night I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the city buzzing below, and for the first time in my life, I felt the strange, exhilarating weight of my own power. Not spite, not vengeance, just the truth finally spoken aloud. And in that truth, I found a freedom that no invitation, no photograph, no seat at their table could ever have given me. The days after serving the eviction notice became a storm I had both dreaded and secretly craved. For the first time, I wasn't the forgotten one, the convenient shadow. My name was on their lips every hour, but not with love, with rage, with disbelief, with the bitterness of those who realized the ground beneath them was never theirs. Ethan was the first to call. His voice thundered down the line, heavy with the arrogance he had carried since boyhood. "Melanie, how could you do this to Mom and Dad? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? After everything they've done for you." The old me would have softened, apologized, tried to explain. But something inside had shifted too deeply. I no longer felt the need to justify my existence to the people who had erased me. "They excluded me from your wedding," I said flatly. "They made it clear I wasn't family. They wrote me out. I'm simply returning the favor." He sputtered, anger spilling into insults. I hung up before the venom could corrode me further. The silence after was a strange kind of peace, like shutting a window against a storm, but peace didn't last. My sister Lydia sent a flood of messages. "This is going too far. We're still your family. Please don't destroy everything over a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding, what a careful little word for betrayal. As if my erasure was an accident. As if seating charts rearrange themselves and invitations magically print false dates. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured my focus into rebuilding something I should have claimed long ago, my own life, my own voice. I spent mornings walking through the park, watching light move across the pond, like liquid gold. Afternoons were devoted to work campaigns, strategies, small businesses trusting me to give their names shape and resonance. I realized I had built something real while my family believed me to be fragile. Every invoice paid, every client satisfied was a quiet rebellion. Proof that invisibility was never incompetence, it was a story they told to keep themselves comfortable. Still, the weight of memory was heavy. Nights stretched long, filled with replayed scenes from childhood. I saw myself at 12 standing at the sink washing dishes, while my brother sprawled on the couch. At 16, waiting at the curb for rides that never came. At 20, receiving a belated birthday card, signed without thought. Each memory was a stitch in the tapestry of my invisibility, and pulling at them now hurt more than I expected. One evening, Aunt Ruth stopped by with soup in hand. She sat with me at the kitchen table, her eyes kind, her silence patient. When I finally spoke, the words tumbled out like water breaking through a dam. "I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to be chosen," I whispered. "And now I've chosen myself, but it feels like loss, not victory." She reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "Loss and victory can wear the same face, Melanie. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is to walk away from people you thought you couldn't live without." Her words sank deep. For the first time, I realized grief and empowerment could coexist, that claiming myself might always ache, but ache does not mean wrong. A week later, I returned to the cottage. Not to gloat, not to press salt into wounds, but to see it with new eyes. The furniture was gone, the rooms hollow. Echoes lingered, summer laughter, winter quarrels, birthdays that blurred together. I walked from room to room like a ghost, returning to haunt her own past. In the kitchen, I traced the grooves in the wooden counter, remembering the time I had baked cookies for Ethan's science fair only for my mother to tell guests Lydia had made them. I remember standing, silent, cheeks hot, my hands still sticky with dough. The ache of that moment lived in the wood grain. I moved to the living room where the fireplace wore the scars of countless winters. I remembered curling up on the rug with a library book while the others played card games, my laughter quiet so as not to interrupt theirs. The silence had been my shelter, but also my prison. Finally, I stepped onto the porch, the lake glinting under a pale sun. For years, I had believed this place was the heart of my family. Now I understood it was simply a house. The heart had never included me, and so I could let it go. I listed the property that very week. Offers came swiftly. The lake was coveted, the cottage charming. Within a month, it was sold to a couple with 2 children who promised to paint the shutters blue. Signing the final papers, I felt something unspool inside me. The house was no longer a shrine to my erasure. It was a closed chapter, and closing it did not kill me. It freed me. My parents moved in with Ethan as I had predicted. Rumors drifted back to me through neighbors and old acquaintances, how my mother lamented her ungrateful daughter, how Ethan's wife bristled at having in-laws underfoot, how my father sat quietly at dinners, a shadow of the man I once knew. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate. Their misery was not my triumph. My triumph was in no longer measuring myself by their approval. Yet loneliness still gnawed at the edges of my nights. Freedom can feel like exile when you have lived too long in captivity. I wrote late into the dark journals filled with memories, reflections, fragments of a story I wasn't sure I would ever share. Writing became a mirror in which I could finally see myself, flawed, scarred, but whole. It was during one of those nights that a message arrived. Catherine, my niece, Lydia's daughter. She had found me on social media, her words tentative. "Aunt Melanie, I don't know everything that happened, but I want to. Can we meet?" For a long time I stared at the screen. My instinct was to guard myself, to assume she was just another emissary of their narrative. But something in her words rang different. It wasn't demand. It was curiosity, a willingness to listen. We met at a small bakery downtown. She arrived nervous, clutching a notebook, her eyes wide with both fear and hope. "I just want to understand," she said. "Mom doesn't talk about it. But I remember things. The way you were left out, the way you never complained." Tears stung my eyes. In her voice I heard the echo of my own younger self, the girl who had noticed everything, who had swallowed silence. And suddenly I realized the story wasn't just mine. It was a legacy I could either let repeat or finally break. That day I told Catherine everything. About the fake invitation, about the cottage, about decades of invisibility that had shaped me. She listened without interruption, her pen moving furiously across the page. And when I finished, she reached across the table much like Aunt Ruth had done and whispered, "You deserved so much better. I want you to know I see you." Her words cracked something open inside me. For the first time in decades, I felt seen by someone who still carried the family name. That night, as I sat with my journal, I realized this wasn't only a story of betrayal. It was a story of inheritance, not of property or money, but of silence. And if I didn't speak, that silence would keep traveling down through generations, shaping daughters and granddaughters into shadows. No more. Catherine's visit marked the first time in years I felt hope bloom without apology. She came back the following week, then again after that, always with her notebook, always with the same quiet attentiveness. She asked about my childhood, about the small cruelties that never made it into photographs, about what it meant to survive in the margins of your own family. Each question was a lantern. With her, the darkness was no longer total. But word travels fast in bloodlines, even fractured ones. It wasn't long before Ethan and Lydia discovered that Catherine had been meeting me. The phone calls began again, this time more venomous, more desperate. Lydia left me voicemails laced with accusation. "You're poisoning my daughter against us. You've always been jealous. Don't drag her into your bitterness." Ethan's tone was sharper still. "If you keep meddling, we'll make sure you regret it. Stop clinging to people who don't belong to you." The irony stung because hadn't they spent my entire life convincing me I didn't belong to them? I didn't reply. But Catherine showed me screenshots of texts from her mother, guilt dripping from every word. "Don't see her. She's unstable. She's trying to ruin us." Catherine's hands shook as she passed me the phone. "I know it's not true," she said, "but it hurts hearing her talk about you like that." I gathered her trembling fingers in mine. "They don't understand you, Catherine, or me, or the courage it takes to question the story we're told. That courage is yours. No one can take it away." Still, the pressure mounted. My parents called too, their voices worn thin by years, but sharpened with entitlement. My mother wept theatrically about betrayal, about sacrifice, about how she had done her best. My father's tone was quieter, almost pleading. "Why can't you just let this go? Melanie, families fight, families forgive. Why make it permanent?" But what they refused to acknowledge was that permanence had begun long before me. They had made my erasure permanent year after year by leaving me out of moments that mattered. My retaliation was not the birth of division. It was simply the mirror they didn't want to look into. The confrontation came to a head one Saturday afternoon when Ethan showed up at my apartment unannounced. He pounded on the door until the frame rattled. Against my better judgment, I opened it, Catherine beside me for the weekend. His face was flushed, eyes wild with indignation. "You've gone too far," he snapped the second I appeared. "Selling the cottage? Fine. You want to ruin Mom and Dad's lives? Fine. But dragging Catherine into this, that's where I draw the line." "She came to me," I said, voice steady though my heart galloped. "She wanted the truth. I didn't force her." His gaze flicked to Catherine, cold and cutting. "Go upstairs," he ordered her. "Now." To my surprise, she didn't move. "No, Dad," she whispered. "I want to be here." His jaw clenched. He turned back to me. "You think this is strength, Melanie, airing dirty laundry, turning my daughter against me? You're pathetic. Bitter. No wonder no one wanted you there." The words struck, but not in the way he intended. They struck like sparks on stone, igniting fury instead of shame. I stepped closer, closing the space between us. "Do you hear yourself, Ethan? You admit it. No one wanted me there. That wasn't an accident, that was cruelty. And you expect me to keep forgiving you for it." He scoffed, but I didn't stop. "You and Lydia learned from Mom and Dad how easy it was to erase me. And you practiced it until it became second nature. But tell me, what does it say about you that you're terrified of me telling Catherine the truth? If your version of family is so noble, why does it shatter under a little light?" His face darkened. For a moment I thought he might strike me, but Catherine stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. "Dad, stop. I see her. I believe her. You can scream all you want, but you can't undo what you did. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Ethan's nostrils flared, his chest rising and falling like a man who'd lost the battle but refused to admit defeat. Finally, he spat, "You'll regret this, both of you." And he stormed off, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. Catherine collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her cheeks. I knelt beside her, holding her close. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I murmured. "But you were brave. You didn't let him silence you." She nodded through her sobs. "I don't want to be like them. I don't want to pretend anymore." That night, after she fell asleep on my couch, I sat awake by the window, the city humming softly below. My body shook with adrenaline, but beneath it was something fierce, something unyielding vindication. For decades they had written me as weak, forgettable, disposable. But standing in that doorway, I realized the truth. They feared me. They feared the woman who refused to stay erased. The weeks that followed were uneasy. My parents retreated further into Ethan's home, clinging to his narrative. Lydia stopped calling altogether, but Catherine kept coming, kept writing, kept asking questions that mattered. Together we began piecing together a new kind of family, one built not on denial, but on truth. One Sunday she brought over an old photo album, one my mother had given her. We sat on the floor, flipping through pages. There were birthdays, graduations, vacations. Page after page, my absence screamed louder than any presence. Catherine shook her head. "It's like they wanted to erase you even from history." I traced the edges of the photographs, my face absent in every frame. "They succeeded for a long time," I whispered. "But not anymore." And then, almost without thinking, I pulled out my journal. The one filled with decades of notes, reflections, evidence of my quiet life. I handed it to her. "Read it, Catherine. This is the story they'll never tell. But it's ours now." She opened the book reverently, eyes scanning my words, tears welling as she read. And for the first time in my life, I felt something shift. My story was no longer hidden. It was alive, carried in the heart of someone who would not let it die. I realized then revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like survival passed down. Sometimes it looks like truth refusing to be buried. The night after Ethan's outburst, I sat alone at my kitchen table with Catherine's notebook resting between us like a fragile bridge. She had filled its pages with my words, her own observations, fragments of truth she refused to let vanish. In the margin of one page she had written, "She is not invisible. She is my aunt. She matters." I pressed my palm over the words, and for the first time in years the ache in my chest loosened. The following week I received a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. Inside, a single page folded neatly, smelling faintly of her perfume. "You have gone too far. You are tearing this family apart. We raised you, fed you, gave you everything, and now you repay us with betrayal. You have poisoned Catherine. I do not recognize you as my daughter anymore." I read the words twice, then set the paper down. Once they would have gutted me. Once I would have begged, would have clawed at any scrap of recognition. But now they felt like confirmation of what had always been true. I was never her daughter in the way I deserved to be. I was a placeholder, a backdrop, an afterthought. And finally, she had written it plain. I burned the letter in a glass bowl on the balcony, watching the flames devour each line. Ash swirled into the night air, carried away by wind, until there was nothing left but a faint scorch mark on glass. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply watched and let the weight of their rejection lift from me like smoke. Catherine arrived the next morning. I showed her the bowl, the ashes, the empty page. She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Doesn't it hurt?" she asked. "Yes," I admitted. "But it's a clean hurt, not the kind that festers. This hurt tells me I'm free." We walked together to the park, the air crisp, the trees glowing with late autumn light. Children laughed on swings, dogs bounded across grass, life unfolded in its ordinary beauty. I realized then that family is not always blood. Family is who shows up, who listens, who carries your story when you're too tired to. Catherine, Aunt Ruth, Even the small girl at the literacy center who grinned when she finished her first chapter book. These were my family now, and that was enough. Still, there were nights when loneliness crept in, like fog whispering doubts. What if I had made a mistake? What if I had cut ties too cleanly? But then I would remember the invitation with the false date, the wedding photos laid out like evidence of my erasure, and the doubts would vanish. Forgiveness. I realize does not require reconciliation. Forgiveness can be choosing to stop bleeding for people who keep cutting you. I began writing more publicly essays posted under my own name, stories of invisibility and survival words that resonated with strangers who wrote back, "This is my story too." Each message felt like a hand reaching through the dark, reminding me that I was not alone. That silence had never been mine alone to carry. Catherine became my fiercest supporter. She told her friends, her professors, even her therapist about me. "She's teaching me what it means to tell the truth," she said, once her voice steady with pride. And in her eyes I saw not the forgotten sister, not the invisible daughter, but a woman who had turned survival into testimony. Months passed. My parents stayed with Ethan, their bitterness calcifying into routine. Lydia stopped mentioning me altogether. Rumors said they called me ungrateful, unstable, vindictive. I let them write their stories, because I had finally written mine and mine was louder. One spring morning, Catherine and I returned to the lake cottage not as owners or heirs, but as visitors. The new family had painted the shutters blue just as they promised. Children's bicycles leaned against the porch, laughter spilled out through open windows. We stood at the edge of the driveway watching the house that had once defined so much of my pain, now brimming with life that had nothing to do with me. Catherine slipped her arm through mine. "Do you regret it?" she asked. I shook my head. No, that house was never mine to keep. It was mine to release. We turned away, then walking back toward the car, sunlight breaking through the clouds. I felt light, as though I had finally set down the baggage I'd carried my entire life. That evening, I sat at my desk, opened my journal, and wrote the sentence that would anchor the rest of my days. I am done asking to be chosen. I choose myself. It has been months since then, and life is quieter, simpler, but fuller than I ever imagined. I have clients who respect my work, a niece who loves me fiercely, an aunt who never stopped believing in me. I no longer chase invitations to tables where my chair is always missing. I build my own table, and those who come to sit with me do so out of choice, not obligation. And to you listening now, I want to say this. If you have ever felt erased by those who should have loved you most, if you have ever been left out of rooms you long to enter, know this: you are not alone. You are not invisible. You are not disposable. You are enough exactly as you are. Sometimes the family you are born into cannot see your worth. That does not make you worthless, it makes their vision flawed. If my story has resonated with you, if you've felt the sting of betrayal or the ache of invisibility, I invite you to share your own truth. Leave a comment, subscribe, join this community of voices that refuse to stay silent. Because together, we remind each other that being unseen does not mean we do not exist. Thank you for listening, for seeing me, for carrying this story forward.